Today we embark on a fantastic adventure and we will be meeting our heroes who will go on this quest.
Blood and Betrayal awaits. Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to Roleplay Chat.
Roleplay Chat is a channel and medium where the two of us share our opinions and our views on the different aspects of the tabletop role-playing hobby. And essentially we're doing this to better ourselves as game masters along with our audience.
Today we start our campaign diary for Blood and Betrayal, what we'll call Blood and Betrayal, and we're going to meet our heroes, part 1.
And before we really dig into who these heroes are, I think it might be important for us to give you guys a little bit of basic context of the systems we're using and the kind of thematics of what we're doing in our real play of Warhammer, the role-playing game.
Exactly. So we're using the lore of Warhammer, the one from Fantasy, from Game Workshop, from the Fantasy Roleplay that you can. There's different edition of. There's 4 editions in total, but we're actually using a different system. We're using a homebrew system that's a Fate core. The name of the system is called Fate Core, but heavily modified. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the mechanics or anything, but just so you know.
And the Warhammer universe, for those of you who might not know much about it, is a fantasy setting, but extremely low fantasy, very grim, very dark. It's almost set in like a mix between industrial and medieval times. You know, guns exist. Mm-hmm. There's steam engines, I think.
Yeah.
This kind of stuff.
It's rare, but
but it exists. Mm-hmm. There's also some magic, but it's also, for the most part, rare.
Very regulated. Mm-hmm. It needs to be controlled by the Empire, otherwise you're considered to be a witch, and even then sometimes. So it's dangerous to show your power. So that's why it's kind of low fantasy.
In terms of the races and the kinds of, I guess, classes that exist in the Warhammer universe, it's pretty different from what some of us might be used to in Dungeons and Dragons, for instance. But there are some analogs that are pretty similar. You know, there are wizards, there are the thief archetypes, there are rogue type characters, cleric type characters.
Yes, there's also really, I think the main difference is when you're playing in Warhammer, you might start something that's not considered heroic, something like a rat catcher or a peasant or something like that. Technically, you could start as this in Dungeons and Dragons, but in Warhammer, your character is not considered special until he proves it himself or herself. Mm-hmm. I feel like in Dungeons and Dragons, you start knowing you're going to be a hero. Am I?
It depends on your campaign.
That's true.
But
that's true.
In this campaign, I guess, regardless of setting, that's not entirely the case. Mm-hmm. But our heroes still prove to be worthy.
Yes.
Worthy of being called heroes.
Yeah.
But I think before we go too much more into who these heroes are, we should continue talking about specifically the world that you created, Chris.
Yeah, I'm the game master in that campaign. We might do other campaign diaries that I'm not going to be game master, but for Blood and Betrayal, I'm the GM.
And I'm one of the players.
Yes.
I guess we should mention that.
Yeah. So in terms of the campaign, I must say that I started using a pre-made adventure. At the beginning, it's pretty close to the source material, and I get further and further away depending on what the characters do. I am not tied to the adventure at all. I just use it for reference. There's a lot of it that I remove, but at the beginning, if you've run, I think it's Through the Drakewald, the main adventure in the 2nd edition, you'll notice a lot of similarities.
And we can link that at the bottom if
yeah,
for those of you who might be interested, or you can engage with us and we can help you find that content. It was a neat setting for sure. Mm-hmm.
So we start in the Middle Land, that's kind of the province, in a region really close to Middenheim, which is one of the biggest city of the Empire. The Empire being basically the human world. There's other human region like Bretonia and stuff like that, but that's the main region where usually all games start.
It's kind of analogous to what the UK or Europe would sort of, you know, it's got its
Germany.
geographic similarities in as well in terms of climate. It's kind of like northern France, maybe Germany, kind of these not cold but can be colder climates,
like humid, snow
in the winter times. Yeah. And in terms of what was happening in our adventure, essentially we found ourselves in this scenario where there was kind of the tail end of this large war. Right? There was these hordes of chaos that attacked Middleland, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the Middle Land. Well, the whole empire, but basically coming from the north. It's one of the first. Well, not the first one, but it's still pretty north. So the Chaos Invasion comes from the North Pole, basically. So that's where it got stopped. Basically, that's where the humans stopped the incursions, and that's where we meet our heroes. So even though the incursion was stopped, the war still rages on in different regions around the big cities. So there was a huge attack on Middenheim that was stopped, which we'll visit in the future campaign diaries. But it was the army was stopped, but it spread in the forest and everywhere. And basically, the army has left Middenheim and Middelland, and most of the leaders are actually still at war in other regions. And that's why the heroes will find themselves relying on the group and not some big heroic figure that's in Middenheim.
And in addition to all of this, I think it's important to flag that despite the war being over, danger lurks in every corner. You know, chaos beasts, evil creatures continue to roam Middleland. The streets are not safe. The country, forests, dark spaces are not a safe place to go. So this is kind of the environment that our heroes find themselves in at the very beginning. Before we continue this trail, I think Chris and I agree that it's important for you as our listeners to get a glimpse into who these heroes are, their personalities and their quirks, motivations, and their creation. So I think we'll start off with my hero. Yeah. I mean, it would make sense. I know the most about him. So I'll start with the easy one. So my hero is Dietrich Kepler. And Dietrich is a young man, 18, 19 years old. Not that that matters. But he's a small person in stature. You know, he's scrawny, thin, short, scruffy hair. Kind of picture one of your anime characters that maybe you might have grown up watching or something like this. But he's, you know, despite his somewhat unimpressive physical stature, he's a very intelligent person. Very, very cunning, very sharp, and gets very excited when he gets to learn, when he gets to share information. Dietrich is also a character who's, you know, despite his eagerness and willingness to help, is someone who is also a little secretive, kind of keeps to himself, flies under the radar, wouldn't be the first person to talk in a conversation. So not exactly shy, but could come across that way. In terms of Dietrich's role in the campaign, Dietrich is arriving at Untergard. And Untergard is this small city, walled fortress, kind of. Yeah, it's a city that main attraction is a bridge that links the two parts of the province. And so he's arriving here, and Dietrich is a mail carrier. We talked a little bit about how Warhammer has some of these unconventional classes. Here we have one. So he was a mail carrier, and he had a very important letter that he delivered to the captain of Untergard. So he arrived, gave him this letter, and this letter allowed them to properly defend Untergard from an invasion of, I guess,
Beastmen.
beastmen who were lingering about. So he had these letters that he had to deliver, but after those were done, he continued to remain in Winterguard. He met some of the other heroes, but for the most part, didn't interact with them. He remained by the captain's side, gave him tactical and intellectual advice, and also became very close with, or not very close, he became as close as you might become and acquainted
in a week or so.
Yeah, Father Peter. Father Peter being a priest of Sigmar, one of the main religions in Middelland, in the Empire, I would say.
Yeah, it's the main one in the whole Empire.
And he kind of, exchanged knowledge, exchanged book smarts with Father Peter.
One thing I really like about Dietrich is I created part of him, but one big part you brought is one of his aspects is he's cautiously nervous, and I really like how you portray him.
Yeah, I guess this is a good time to talk about the aspects of our hero. I know we want to be as system agnostic as possible, but in the Fates system, there's a mechanism where you create these aspects that help define who your hero is and allows you to play them, to role play them even better and get rewarded for doing so. So, as you said, one of the aspects that I created for Dietrich was that he is cautiously nervous. And the reason why I really like this is because it's kind of like a double-edged sword. There are pros to it where he takes his time, he analyzes things, kind of stays to the sidelines and investigates in that way. But his nervousness is something that can get in his way. If he's, trying to present to a large group of people, if he's trying to convince people to do something, it adds this other dimension to his character, which I really liked and found it was kind of like a little bit of an acting challenge. You got to play this little guy who kind of stutters a little bit and he's not always sure about himself, and it's hard to convince other people to do something if you're doing that. So I really enjoyed having that as one of his aspects. Other aspects were kind of also intellectually driven. He had a photographic memory, which allowed him to really remember.
Yeah, for the good and for the bad, right? So it could something really scary or like a mental scar he would have even worse than other people.
Almost like PTSD.
Yeah. So he could have flashback all the time because he remembers perfectly. But also other times, oh, I forgot what was written in that book. Well, you have photographic memory, so we have a mechanic for that because it's one of your aspects. So that was handy.
It came
multiple times.
Yeah, it definitely did. And then there were a few others, but I don't think they were too core to his. And obviously,
there's 5 of them, but I think 3 is usually enough to sum up the core of the character.
Absolutely. So that's Dietrich, and I had a lot of fun playing as Dietrich. We'll continue to learn about who he is and what how he evolves over time. But
and he did a lot.
And he absolutely did. And he continues to evolve. He's a lot of fun to play, so I'm looking forward to that. And then there were a few other heroes. I'm not sure if we have time to talk about all of them, but we could definitely talk about at least one more.
Yes, Otis. Otis doesn't have a last name, actually.
I didn't know that.
No, well, he decided on one later in the campaign. But
just like Madonna.
Yeah, he just Otis.
he's far from that.
Yeah, he's so I created Otis to be pretty typical rogue, thief, kind of orphan, very, very typical. Not super original, but what was original about it, I think it was the struggle inside of him. So he's really scrappy, cunning. He was raised basically by himself and with his sister in the streets of the region of Middelland, going from one city to the other. He knew Captain Schreider because he was spend a lot of time in Untergard and stuff like that. So he's from where the heroes start. But before the battle arrived, he left the town to be secured, basically, because he didn't want to partake in the fight. He didn't want to help contribute. And that created a lot of tension in his character after that, when he saw some of people he really liked die in that battle. So it's Otis usually wears really dark clothes and covers his face, and at the beginning of the campaign doesn't trust really anybody. It doesn't want to help people if it might put him into the danger. So, but that again evolves a lot through the beginning of the campaign. Also, being from Untergard, he had a really close relationship with Granny Mosher, who's actually in charge of the orphans. So that's when he met her. Is basically his maternal figure.
He didn't really have anyone to look up to.
No, and she was always kind to him. If he was really hungry, she would have him home in a bowl of soup or something. So she was really there for him when it really counted. So he really, I won't say love, but he's really attached to her. He also met Randall, who's another of our heroes. That we'll talk more in detail later, but that's also from the region. So they were kind of like childhood buddies, but like I said, Otis would leave for a long period of time sometimes, but they spent a decent amount of time together. In terms of aspects, because we talked about aspects, I said like scrappy and cunning, but also he had an aspect that's like, if you're too slow to see me coming, you deserve to be robbed. So that really represents Otis very well, I think.
Yeah, and I think that aspect kind of indicates who Otis was before being a member of this party. And I think over time we'll see that that aspect kind of plays less of a major impact on the way that his character is portrayed.
Yeah.
So it'll be definitely something to watch for as we move along in the story.
Yes, and we'll try to keep you updated on, like, after certain events come up, how did this affect the aspects or how the character evolved through the story? Because that's a big deal. Like, for me, it's a big part of the fun. So how did Diedrich perceive Otis at the beginning of the campaign?
That's an interesting question. Diedrich, for the most part, didn't interact very much with Otis. Diedrich being a little bit more of an intellectual type, like I said, spent a lot of time with Father Peter, one of the priests of Sigmar, and really didn't really have much business going into the orphanage or really spending time with someone who seemed a little bit shady, honestly, at first. And this is Diedrich speaking, of course. You know, Otis coming in and out of town, wearing a dark outfit, kind of keeping to himself, is something that Diedrich obviously could understand, but was a little unsure of his motivations. Could he really trust someone like this in an environment where there's danger everywhere? This was his first opinion. Yes. You know, this may or may not have changed over time, but at first it was kind of, who's this guy? He seems a little shady.
And I think it was for most of the players, probably except the person playing Randall, who had, like, in the backstory, a link to that guy and knew him on a more profound level. But I think everyone else was like, "Why? Who's that guy? He just, like, lurks in the shadows and doesn't talk much." And yeah.
I guess that's always the struggle with those kinds of rogue type.
Yeah, and I was going to say, that was one of my worries as the game master. When I created that character, I was like, the loner type is a source of a lot of discussion on, should you do that? Should you not do that? And to be honest, I think I gave it to the player that I knew would work with. The pros and the cons of this. So I think that's another episode right there of Roleplay Chat. We can talk about loner characters. I know there's a lot of divergent opinions on this.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic of conversation. But I think this little segue pushes us nicely into our next, the next part of what we are hoping to do with our campaign diaries is kind of like a Q&A where we ask each other questions. So essentially what we're hoping to do is kind of in the similar fashion as other more famous campaign diaries out there, have kind of a more introspective look at what was going through our heads when we were playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the perspective that we bring that's kind of neat is that we get to talk to each other about these things. Me as a player in the campaign and Chris as the game master, we get to pick each other's brains
Mm-hmm.
and really see, did I like that as a player? How did I feel about that decision? Did he expect the actions I was going to take, etc., etc. Obviously here we're only talking about the heroes, so there maybe not as much content to talk about, but we'll still try to dig in there and get into the weeds.
Yeah, so one thing I was worried about when I started is actually doing those pre-made characters. I spent a lot of time doing them. I made them interesting for me, but then I have to give it to my friends. So I wanted to know, like, how did you like it? How did you like having a pre-existing, like you weren't much part of the creative process except some questions that I gave you.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I didn't mind it. You put in a lot of effort, and it was obvious that you put in a lot of effort. And I think the reason I didn't mind it as much is because I still had the creative freedom to make my character act the way I wanted to within a certain realm of realism. You know, you kind of gave me the more intellectual based person, but I took that personality and you kind of allowed me the flexibility to do what I wanted with him, as long as it lived within those parameters. And I think that's why I liked it. Had you told me, like, no, you can't be nervous, or that doesn't fit what the role your character has in the greater scheme of things, then I might have been a little bit frustrated.
Because the cautiously nervous aspect was you who brought it. Like, so basically, in terms of, again, we have 5 aspects. I think I filled 1 or maybe 2 for you, and the rest was up to the players. Yeah,
so I thought that was good. And I could also appreciate the diversity that's guaranteed when a game master does this. You know, when a game master has not a campaign, but a cast of characters that they've already fabricated, I know that these characters are going to be unique enough that they can all stand out and have their own unique role, which avoids doubling up and everyone can still feel special and all of this fancy, happy stuff.
We're a party.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's everything. Yeah, I don't think there was much more to that than that. I know that sometimes people give the option to their heroes, or give the players the option to choose the hero that they want to play, and kind of like put them all out on the table and say, here are the 5 people, which ones do you want? But then you don't get the opportunity to give secret stuff.
And that's the thing, right? I think most of the characters, and we're not talking about them right now, we're going to present the other characters. We're not giving in all the secrets, but most of them have little stuff that will come up during the campaign, little part of their backstory. Some I've put, some they've filled in, but when I created them, I wanted to have a secret pitch with all my players. And I think I succeeded at that. So that's why I didn't want to do the whole pitch to everybody and give all their secret. But at the same time, that can create a problem where if everybody knows everything, everybody trusts everyone, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So that's one of the things. At one point of the campaign, we'll talk about it more, but cohesion was an issue. Not a big issue, but like it still worked, but it was something I was concerned about. And I think Mathieu was one of the players that was the most concerned about having a cohesive party.
Yeah, we can touch more about it later, I think, but it's definitely something that's important to make. Your heroes have to work together. Or not have to, but to a certain level of compatibility, they should be working together.
Yeah.
And then I guess I have a question for you as well. So the question that I thought up was, why did you choose the Warhammer universe? What was special about this? What do you like about the Warhammer universe? And did it help you in any way portray the campaign that you were trying to portray?
Yes, the reason I chose Warhammer for me was a no-brainer, because I was raised playing Warhammer 1st edition, then I played 2nd edition, 3rd, and now 4th. 95% of the books I read are in the Warhammer universe. I probably know more history about the fake universe of Warhammer than real. I know it's sad, but I don't know much about history, just to be clear. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I've always played in the Warhammer universe. So that was almost the cost for the players to play in my campaign. It was going to be a new lore that they probably didn't know much about. I know some people knew about 40K, which is a total different beast. So for me, it wasn't a question. And my worry or my goal was to bring my friends in this world that I've played my whole life and have them have fun, right? Because they came mostly from Dungeons and Dragons. That's high fantasy. So me to come and be like, okay, you'll be rat catchers, and I didn't do that. You'll see through the characters that I tried to make them D&D-ish with something close to the classes, just so the transition was a bit smoother. But it was definitely one of my challenge to make this universe fun for everybody.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thanks for chiming in. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed our quick summary of these two heroes and the beginning of our campaign. We're going to continue this in a second part where we talk about the other two heroes that are going to be joining this adventure.
Umgrim and Randall.
And we're going to continue. We're going to keep going. We're going to showcase the entire Blood and Betrayal storyline that Chris spent a lot of time working on, and that me as a player and the other players, I can say, are thoroughly enjoying playing. So hopefully you can continue to follow us along on this adventure. I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Chris.
No, I think I'm really excited to see what's going to come up in the future, because right now we just talked about characters, but with there's going to be a lot of drama and tension, and like the name says, blood and betrayal. So
you know what to expect.
You know what to expect, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about everything for me, Chris.
I think that's all, Matt.
Let's call it a chat.